Hello, we are here in Guanajuato, Mexico to interview the scholar Gwendolyn Midlo-Hall in our series Talking with Scholars on Slavery. Today is a special occasion because we are interviewing a pioneer not only in studies of slavery but also on the applications of digital technologies to the studies of slavery. Gwen, thank you for granting us this interview today.
It's my pleasure. Good to see you. I don't have much company these days.
Well, here we are with you. It's a special moment also for me. Gwendolyn is hard to describe. I would say no hard, but it would take a long time to describe Dr. Hall's life. She just recently published a memoir called Haunted by Slavery, in which she is a very moving memoir, where she describes her life, her involvement in the civil rights movement in her native New Orleans, Louisiana, his life fighting for civil rights and social justice, but also the reasons why she moved to study slavery, the slave trade, and how she used this as a way to for social and political activism in the country. So when I would like to start this interview by asking you, why slavery? Why do you choose this topic? Why a southern lady in Louisiana choose such a topic like slavery, which I imagine was pretty controversial when you decided to do so?
Well, that's because I had a terrible education in New Orleans, and much of the instruction had to do with race, the inferiority of blacks. They were presented as ignorant people who could not learn anything complicated. They could only learn to serve, and that they were also violent and dangerous. And they wrote about a slave conspiracy in 1795. And they wrote in this textbook, this was for elementary students, they wrote that the slaves rose up in order to grab the white women and rape them. Mm-hmm. Now, I grew up with understanding immediately that none of this was true about black people. And I saw how they were using all this false history to strengthen racism. And I became determined to study history and change that, so that it would change people's consciousness about race. And that was my main motivation in studying slavery.
Well, thank you for studying slavery and giving us such wonderful material to learn from, and I have to say that I'm also thanking you for my wonderful colleague, Jorge Felipe Gonzalez. I know you had quite a hand in getting him his doctorate, his PhD, and I remember I first met you when I was giving you a prize for the Southern Association of Women Historians, and you had won one of our prizes decades ago and were a leading pioneer then. But I am also saying in this organization, many of the people there watching you create this award-winning work, wonder if you could share with us what it was like to go get your doctorate. What was it like for a woman being pioneering in this particular field? Can you give us a little background on that? I know you were an activist and a writer long before you got your PhD, but if you could just share what it was like to pioneer in the academy as you did.
Well, let me say that it was the whole concept of what women were supposed to do and what women were supposed to be was extremely backward when I was growing up. And it took me a long time to overcome my own self-doubts. It took me a very long time before I realized that I really could do something original and important on my own. And I grew up in a family with pretty modern thinking parents for those days, but they told me things like I would either have to be, if I couldn't find a husband, then I could become a teacher or a librarian, and that was it. I couldn't be anything else.
I see. Now, when you got to graduate school, did you have a mentor or someone encouraging you in terms of your very original work?
Well, I went to Tulane for about 2 years, and I got 3 years of academic credit, and I had majors in both European and American history.
Wow.
And I couldn't stand Tulane either because of the racism. This was when racism was accepted in historiography throughout the country. It wasn't just a Southern thing by any means.
Sure.
Of course.
And I really couldn't stand what I was being taught, and I objected to what I was being taught. And that didn't get me very far. Not only that, but I was a communist at that time.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
And this was right after World War II,
Yes.
when the Cold War came down, and I could not have possibly made it in graduate school. First of all, it was a man's profession. Nobody expected women to become history graduate students.
So you were a triple threat.
Yes.
Just definitely frightening all the scholars
Right.
with your originality, your own independent thinking, and of course, you know, the mind does have sex. That's a thing that in the Middle Ages they would preach. The mind has no sex, and there's really a problem because it got translated into the sex has no mind, which I know you were able to defeat that principle.
Yeah, well, I never believed that. And I must say that my mother didn't believe that either.
Great.
But she did her best to get me to adjust to it because she wanted me to be safe. And so she felt that I would not be safe unless I had a man in my life to protect me.
And when you finish with Tulane, I know I learned by reading your memoir that you had a very active involvement in political affairs and in political actions, that you were even surveilled by the FBI. How does that change your perspective about the nation, about your position as a woman in the political movement, of your role as a social activist?
Well, the strange part is that I didn't know it.
You didn't know.
And it didn't, you know, I had some idea that I was being followed and that there was surveillance going on. But the FBI just broke their neck to ruin my life at every turn.
Yes.
So that they got me fired from jobs and evicted from apartments,
Mm-hmm.
even when I had 2 small children.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to figure out, now why is all these bad things happening to me? Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Yes, and you found all the documents that are in the memoir, all the documents that
Yes.
you found there.
Yes,
now
it was
accessible.
1977 before I got my FBI files and realized that everything that went wrong with my life was the FBI's fault. It was done deliberately.
And then when you went to the University of Michigan to pursue your doctorate degree, and you wrote this wonderful piece on the comparative history and slavery
Yeah,
between Cuba and Saint-Domingue.
right.
Why did you choose that topic, and who, let's say, influenced you to write about
Okay,
this
well,
topic?
let me say first of all that the first encouragement I got as a scholar was not at the University of Michigan.
Okay.
It was at the Mexico City College, or the University of the Americas, which is now in Puebla, Mexico. And this was where I people first began to realize that I had talent for history. And my first mentor was Richard Greenleaf, who was teaching there, and then he went on to Tulane and founded the Latin American Studies program there.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it was a weird thing because when I went there to get my degree, because I had never finished my degree, and I was already in my mid-30s by then.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got my BA degree, and then when in those days, and this may still be true, when you get a BA degree, you take the graduate record exam. Do they still give that?
They do.
They do.
GRE.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I didn't even know what it was. I'd never heard of it. Everybody was studying for it, and I had no idea that I should even study for it, because I had no idea what it was. So I took the exam, and then it turned out that I got like 30 points above the 100th percentile in humanities, in social studies, pretty good in history, even though they didn't have any questions about history except British history and U.S. history, which I hadn't studied because I was studying Latin American history. So everybody on the campus was amazed at my scores, and Greenleaf encouraged me to apply to Stanford graduate school.
Fascinating.
Which I did, and I was accepted. At the same time, I was persecuted by somebody else at Mexico City College, and she was the wife of the U.S. consul in Mexico City, and she knew about my politics, I brought my racially mixed son onto the campus and ran into her, and she looked like she was going to drop her teeth when she saw him.
Mm-hmm.
And so she did her best to sabotage me every step of the way, but she didn't succeed because I was doing so well in what I was doing.
She definitely didn't succeed, and you, after your PhD, you did probably one of the major historiographical revolutions, transformation in the study of slavery, which was your database.
Yes,
Louisiana.
Well, that was much later.
Much later, and you did that, and you went to archive and you start unearthing all these documents at the moment when scholars who say that it is impossible to rebuild the life of the slaves, where they came from, the origin. Yet you found the origin, the African ethnic origin of the enslaved in Louisiana, which resulted not only in the database, but in your wonderful book, Africans in Colonial Louisiana. Could you please explain how you came up with this brilliant idea of finding the roots of the Africans?
Okay. Well, when I was studying slavery, the consensus was that everything that was known about slavery had already been discovered, that everybody had written about it already, and there was nothing more to add. And so people just kept reinterpreting each other's work without doing any new research. So I decided finally to write about colonial Louisiana because I knew French well, I knew Spanish well, and of course English is my native language. And so not many people know that many languages that they can work with. And not many people would bother to read handwritten documents, period.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I had colleagues at Rutgers who, when I they found out what these documents I was using. They say none of us study handwritten documents if they're not typed or they're not published. We don't use them. It's too difficult. And that was all of my colleagues at Rutgers. And so when I went to the Point Coupé courthouse to look at testimony of slaves in the Point Coupé conspiracy, I already knew that there was some identification of ethnicities by the slaves. Every time a slave was called to testify, they asked set questions. They'd ask, what is your name? What is your age? Who is your master? What is your nation? And so they were identifying their own ethnicities.
Which is the nation?
Which they, in Spanish they called it, or in French they called it nation.
The nación.
Which is fabulous and just so exciting. I can also repeat in the 1970s when I was working on the whole South, I was discouraged from working in Louisiana. I was told, Louisiana is not like the rest of the South. You can't really work on it. So I finished my dissertation and actually didn't visit the archives till after my dissertation because of this discouragement. And as you point out, I mean, you're doing such magnificent work because it's not just French, Gwen. It is 17th, 18th, 19th century French. And the same with Spanish. When I've sent students to the archives, they encounter this problem. But we are all so much in your debt for this amazing thing. I want to ask you, just personally, what was it like for you to have this amazing, wonderful work that we all praise turn into actual bricks and mortar? Because going to the Whitney plantation and seeing the reference to your work and your picture there, and then going out and seeing the actual carving of names onto these beautiful stones is overwhelming. So what must it be like for you? I have to say, I don't know of any other scholar who's had a database turned into this magnificent monument. It's a monument to your work.
Yes.
That's true, but I think I was even more impressed when the Sunday New York Times had a front page story about my database.
With the names.
Right after it came out in the year 2000.
Wonderful.
And there were 2 full inside pages of the Sunday New York Times devoted to my database with photographs and maps. And it was very well studied and well written.
And by being in the New York Times, it became an internationally known, wonderful resource. And if you go to France, if you go to the UK now, scholars are all in debt to this really amazing resource.
Yes, and also going to the database, because another important element of it is the digital component, where you are a pioneer in something that we now take for granted, which is digital databases on slavery and the slave trade.
Right, exactly.
There are many of them now.
Right.
And scholars are working, creating these databases, yet you are a pioneer.
Well, let me say more than that, I'm a pioneer. It's that my database remains the most detailed and complex slave database extant.
Fascinating. In what sense? Could you please explain more?
Yes,
that?
Because it's almost like artificial intelligence. There are 162 fields, which means possible bits of information that you can enter about the particular slave you're studying. Now, most slave databases just have a few fields.
Right.
And this database, a lot of the slave databases come from the same depository and the same type of document. This database covers all kinds of depositories, all kinds of documents, and you can find out which type of document, you can choose the type of document you want to see. And it's very complex, okay?
Right. So you can filter all these hundreds of variables, you can filter and refine your search result.
162.
162.
And then inside from that, there's also a comments field where you can write anything you want, even if it doesn't fit into any particular item.
And when that database has been used by many historians since you start working on it and publish it. But one of the main use that historians, if I'm wrong, please correct me, that historians have used it for is to trace the links between regions in Africa and the United States and the south of the United States. But also it serves as a sort of methodological starting point for historians working on trying to establish these connections, which is, I think, one of the major transformations in studies of slavery, connecting the origin of the Africans to their destinations in America.
Yeah, but I did that.
You did that.
I mean, I started doing that.
Yes.
I don't know how much people are still doing that.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, for my database, it was the genealogists who loved it, and they went mad. They still do. I hear from genealogists all the time about how they were able to trace their ancestors all the way back, yes, and find their ethnicities. And
I remember reading Exchanging Our Country Marks by Michael Gomez, and
yes,
he plainly cited your work and acknowledged you as an inspiration for this great piece of work that he did. And
yes, but let me say that I've been a little disappointed, mm-hmm, that more scholars have not used the database in all of its great possibilities. And I don't know, I just thought it was just simple to use and obvious at the time that I did it. But now I realize that it's not that simple and obvious, and very few scholars can figure out how to use it. And that's still true. And so this is one of the reasons I'm publishing a book with LSU Press now.
Great.
To better explain to scholars how to use it.
Well, both of us would like to, well, first I would like to just have a little intervention and say you've been a magnificent philanthropist and you've done a lot in New Orleans, and could you share some of those accomplishments with us? Because I really do think you've been one of the few scholars who's given back to bolster the field from the undergraduate level to visiting scholars.
Okay, well, my father died in 1978, and my mother died in 1997. And when I first got my NEH grant to complete my database, I moved to New Orleans. That was in 1991. And my mother told me, I want to put, she said, your father gave so much to this community, and he never asked for anything back. He never asked for recognition. Nobody has given him any recognition for what he did. And I want to leave something in my will that will give him this recognition. And she says, you are the only one I can count on to do this, because my other heirs will not want to don't want me to take the money out of the inheritance.
Well, that is really...
But I can count on you to do it. And so that's when I approached Joseph Logsdon at University of New Orleans And Louisiana had a program then that if you put up $600,000, they would raise it to $1 million at any university in New Orleans and create an endowed chair. And so that was the first thing we did, was to set this up as an endowed chair under my mother's will. And even before that, my mother set up aside some other money and real estate she owned to set up the Midlo Center for New Orleans Studies. And that was back in 1992, I guess, by the time we did that. And so my nephew, Alan Lehman, helped me do it.
That's
He
wonderful.
was a lawyer. And that center, you know, after Katrina, the university was so badly hit that it was the only clear source of money, and still is. And so it's still it becomes more and more prominent for studying New Orleans. And so people come from all over the world to become in residence there. They now have a fellowship for an award, it is, for studies in New Orleans studies in my name. So it's the Gwendolyn Midlo-Hall Award.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And I do keep in touch with Molly Mitchell, who is director. The person who gets the Midlo chair has half time off, so that they can devote half their time to research and the rest to teaching. And Molly Mitchell has done that for a number of years. She's done a wonderful job.
Amazing work, especially in the school system,
Yeah.
where you have your original complaint. Why aren't the students in the grade schools learning the real history? And I know she's working on projects. So
Yeah.
it is really a wonderful full circle. But I
Yeah.
know
Right.
you have.
And the impact is even personal. I was able to, to be granted a PhD scholarship at Michigan State University because of you. Thanks to you, I'm here, first of all, having this discussion, being able to converse with you as a scholar, because you opened so many doors for me that I'm so grateful about it. So your impact has been personal as well.
Well, thank you. And it's been my great pleasure to help other scholars as much as I can.
Well, we have
Thank you.
one
Thank
final
you very much.
request. If you wouldn't mind telling our listeners, slavery studies, as you know, is a flourishing, multi-platform, multi-level area of research. But what advice could you give to someone? What direction would you like to see slavery studies going in October of 2021? Where would you like to see it going?
Well, there's several different levels. I would like to see scholars spend more attention studying original manuscript documents, because that's where the really creative side of history is. And I never did like this tendency to interpret and reinterpret and then reinterpret the reinterpretations of history without creating any more knowledge. And I found that the documents are so different than what you're told slavery was about.
Absolutely.
And each place where you study is different.
Perfect. So,
And it's endless, you know. There's just no end to what you can learn if you study original manuscript documents.
so go to archive. Go to archive. Work with documents. That's your advice.
Yeah,
And you're
well, you
gonna
don't
find-
even have to go to archives anymore.
Yeah, certainly. You don't need to go to archive anymore. Most of the documents are digitized and available. You can do
Right.
it from the comfort of your desk. So, Gwen, thank you very much for granting us this interview.
It's been wonderful
for
to
this
spend
series.
time with you. Yeah.
And
We're
it's a
looking
pleasure.
forward to your book coming
Okay,
out, so you
thank
can
you.
teach us and others. Actually, I would benefit. My wonderful colleague Jorge does not need to be told how to use your database, but I am in the process of learning as we teach, and a new generation interested in digital humanities, and we're all looking to Gwendolyn Midlo-Hall as someone who began it all decades ago.
Thanks.
Well, thank
for
you
listening.
so much. And it's been my pleasure for you to come and visit me, because since COVID, nobody comes anymore.
Well, here
Here
we
we
are.